Okay, so this week we're going to get into more of the nitty-gritty of what constitutes argumentative writing. We talked last week about rhetoric and this more general concept of how we use language and what effect it can have on an audience or the readers. But this week we're going to talk specifically about the three appeals of argument, and we'll discuss what those are as we go through this lecture and how to use them effectively in your writing. Okay, so here we have Aristotle yet again. And Aristotle was the one who posited these ideas of the three appeals of argument. And what do we mean by appeals? We mean the ways in which we appeal to our audience, right? Literally how we appeal to to different aspects of our audience. So Aristotle noted that good arguments make use of all the available means of persuasion. So what are the available means of rhetoric? He named three types of appeals to an audience: emotional appeals, so that which appeals to the heart or the emotions; ethical appeals, appeals that try to reach the credibility or character of the audience; and then logical appeals, which try to reach the logical aspects of readers or their minds. So the first appeal is our emotional appeals, also known as pathos. So we're going to discuss what exactly that means. How does one use emotional appeals in one's writing, and when do you appropriately do so? So when you're trying to appeal to the emotions of your readers, you will be aiming at things or examples that tug at their emotions or their heartstrings, right? So things that invoke values like bravery, compassion, heartbreak, love, grief, anger. So if you think especially about when you watch commercials, right? Television commercials often use pathos or emotional appeals to reach their audience. And we can look at some examples of these at a later time. But keep in mind, when you're trying to appeal emotionally to your audience through your writing, emotional appeals can be overused, right, and border on fallacy or misuse if they're too manipulative. So think also to commercials, right, and advertising. Often they are trying to manipulate us into buying something or something like that. So it's up to you to choose when an emotional appeal to your audience is appropriate for your overall topic or your thesis for your piece of argumentative writing. So for instance, say in a highly scientific essay, emotional appeals might not be applicable. They might not be the right choice. However, if you're writing about something like climate change, an emotional appeal might work, right? And you have to be the judge of your own writing and your own topic to decide when the different appeals are appropriate or applicable. Okay, so the next appeal that Aristotle came up with was this idea of ethical appeals, otherwise known as ethos. And ethical appeals invoke the credibility and good character of the writer, and as a result, the reader. They build common ground with the audience and show that you respect your audience. They build trust. Ethical appeals really establish your authority. And how do you do this practically in your writing? You establish ethos or authority by citing trustworthy sources, by really vetting your sources and making sure you're using sources that are reliable, trustworthy, acceptable in the genre or topic that you're writing about. You also establish ethos by showing that you're fair, by acknowledging other positions, right? By writing an essay that isn't entirely one-sided and biased. In our argumentative writing, we're absolutely arguing for our own position, but one way to show your audience that you've considered many positions is to acknowledge them in your writing. And this gives your writing more credibility. It shows that you've really done your research, you've thought about all of the different sides and aspects of your own argument before coming to your own conclusions. And one other way to establish ethos is to acknowledge credible sources, achievements, positions, publications, and all of that. Okay, and so the third appeal that Aristotle noted was logos, or logical appeals. These are things that appeal to the logic of a reader or a thinker, to their mind, rather than, say, their emotions. Logical appeals are often viewed as the most important of the three appeals because they appeal to the most rational side of us, right? So when you're thinking about how to convince someone of your argument or your point, you're going to want to aim for their most rational thinking, right? The most rational aspect of their thinking, rather than, say, their emotions. Logical appeals provide reasons and evidence to support claims. So you'll see as you begin to write your own argumentative essay for our class, for your second essay, that logical appeals pretty much constitute the bulk of your evidence. So what is this evidence for logical appeals? Well, it's facts and statistics. It could be surveys or questionnaires. It could be your own or others' observations, interviews, testimony, experiments, even personal experience. While we can use personal experience to appeal to the emotions of our readers, we can also use it to appeal to their logic. Another example is charts, images, and other visuals. Okay, so when you think about the three appeals altogether, ethos, pathos, and logos, remember that ethos is that appeal to the credibility or the ethical side of your reader. Pathos is appealing to their logic or their minds. Pathos is appealing to their emotions, and logos is what the appeal to logic or your reader's minds. It's important to keep all three appeals in mind as you write. Okay, so no argumentative essay will use just one of the three appeals. All three appeals need to sort of be kept in your wheelhouse as you're writing, because you want to remember that your audience will be most persuaded by a combination of these three appeals and variation of the types of evidence you choose to incorporate. So keep that in mind as you're writing. Think about all three appeals and vary the types of evidence you choose to incorporate. If you're writing an argument about why, for example, the COVID pandemic is a serious issue that needs more attention and better regulation, you might use this combination of evidence or appeals. Your own personal experience with the virus, and then facts and statistics of the pandemic. So that would be your logical appeal. Hypothetical situations where you kind of create potential situations relating to COVID that might appeal to your readers' emotions and tug at their heartstrings a little bit. And then references to and quotes from credible sources on the issue, which is going to appeal to the ethics or the trustworthiness aspect of your writing. Okay, so when considering the appeals of argument and considering argumentative writing in general, you need to watch out for what we call logical fallacies. And here's a good chart that encompasses basically every single possible logical fallacy that a writer can incorporate. And you want to stay away from these, right? Logical fallacies are basically mistakes in your writing, whether intentional or purposeful, that are there to mislead the reader. So let's look at a few examples of what a logical fallacy is and why you should avoid them. So one logical fallacy is called the slippery slope argument. These are often used to create fear-mongering and to make your readers feel afraid. So for example, one way to create fear-mongering and use the slippery slope fallacy is to say, okay, if one disastrous event occurs, or if one event occurs, disaster will result. So for example, one wrong step on a slick rock will cause you to slip and fall and perish. So this isn't necessarily true, right? And it hurts the credibility of your writing if you incorporate an argument like this. Sometimes slippery slope arguments aren't wrong, but they require lots of evidence to prove the initial event will actually cause a disastrous result. So an example of this, if we legalize marijuana, everyone in the country will become a drug addict. So the workload on you, the author, to prove an argument like this is too vast and really results in a logical fallacy rather than a strong argument. Another type of fallacy is what we call the ad hominem argument. It attacks a person rather than the position of that person. So look at the language here. Hominem comes from, the hominin or human Latin. So again, an ad hominem attacks a person rather than a position. It diverts the attention from the actual argument and focuses instead on the character of the person being attacked. An example of this is, of course, the senator doesn't want to confirm the Supreme Court nominee. The senator doesn't share our religious values, which doesn't get at the actual argument at hand and instead diverts attention to the character of someone or their sort of personal worth. And you want to avoid this and instead focus on the arguments themselves, right? When you're writing argumentative essays, instead of focusing on attacking someone's personal character, which we often see in the news and in media, you want to take the more logical approach and actually dissect the arguments of others in order to prove them wrong, if that is if that's applicable to your own argument. Okay, and another logical fallacy to steer clear of are bandwagon appeals. These urge the audience to go along with the crowd, or in other words, jump on the bandwagon. I'm sure you've heard that phrase before. And they often use hyperbole and flattery, which are ineffective, not rooted in logical arguments, are overly emotional. So an example would be, join the millions of people who support a federal ban on abortion. And in other words, every good moral person knows abortion is wrong. So this argument is asking you to jump on the bandwagon of being a good moral person like these millions and millions of people who support a federal ban on abortion. This is an ineffective argument. Instead, you should be offering specific evidence as to why you think a federal ban on abortion is necessary and why abortion is wrong. Okay, so rather than lumping everyone together and making this huge grand statement, really offers specific, smaller pieces of evidence that prove your point, if that's the argument you want to make. Okay, and another example that I'll let you read on your own is the straw man argument, where you're misrepresenting or distorting an opposing argument, characterizing it as extreme or different than it is to make it easier to attack. So what's important to notice about these logical fallacies is that all logical fallacies, which again we don't want to use, we want to avoid them, use extremism or generalization to try to sway an audience. So in our writing for this class and our writing in general, we want to do the opposite of this. We want to use specific information and rational approaches to logic, rather than these extreme or generalized statements that are an attempt to sway an audience. You can see this in political speech, especially today. We live in such a fraught time. But think about how politicians all over the map, from all different parties, use large, grand, general statements to try to sway an audience when someone sitting at a desk with a piece of writing has so much more ability to focus in on the specifics of an argument and rational thinking. So be that person. Be the person sitting at the desk with your specific information and your rational thought, really thinking through a point or a side of an argument. Again, look for logical fallacies as you watch public figures' speech. Can you identify the fallacies that they employ? Okay, and just a few more things. A quick note about formatting for your academic essays. I saw a lot of incorrect formatting for the personal essays for Essay 1. So for academic essays for our class, for MLA formatting, you need to include all of these following things. So heading, header, title, page numbers. The entire document should be double-spaced, and standard font. So a good standard font is 12-point Times New Roman. And this is what the first page of your essay should look like. This heading over here with your name, my name, the course name, and the due date, You should always have a header with your last name and page numbers in the upper right-hand corner of each page. Make sure you're always giving your essay a title, even if in your first drafts it's just Essay 2. But for your revised drafts, you should come up with a title that speaks to the subject of your paper. And then make sure you're indenting the 1/2 inch or using the tab button to start new paragraphs, and make sure again that your entire document is double spaced.